Welcome to Jazz Piano Skills. I'm Dr. Bob Lawrence. It's time to discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Hey, I want to start off today and thank everyone for the kind feedback I received after last week's episode. It was so nice of so many of you to express encouragement about the new lecture series that I am launching. As I mentioned last week, the series may be a solo lecture, as I did last week, or it could be a panel discussion with jazz educators exploring a specific jazz skill. Either way, I hope this new series will help you discover, learn, and play jazz in a more meaningful and effective way. So again, thank you all for your continued support. It fires me up. Now, we devoted the month of April to exploring the primary sounds of music, major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished, in relation to E flat. In other words, the E flat sounds. Not only the primary E flat sounds, but the altered E flat sounds as well. As we have been doing all year, we used 5 specific melodic patterns to focus on developing mobile fingering. Fingerings that allow our hand, our right hand, to be in a constant state of movement. And why the constant state of movement and the shifting of the hand? Because by constantly moving and positioning our right hand, we are seeking optimal finger usage needed to produce a strong and authentic jazz articulation. And of course, making sure that we never run out of fingers in the middle of a musical phrase. So we have utilized this intentional approach for primary and altered sounds since the beginning of the year, and we will continue to do so for the entire year. So today we will follow the exact same format we used in April with E flat, March and B flat, February was F, January C. The only difference today is we are exploring the primary sounds of music centered on the note A flat. So today we are going to discover essential jazz improvisation exercises. We are going to learn developmental arpeggio and scale patterns of A flat sounds. And we are going to play 5 arpeggio and 5 scale patterns focusing on fingerings and articulation for the primary sounds of A flat, major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished. So as I always like to say, regardless of where you are in your jazz journey, a beginner, an intermediate player, an advanced player, or even if you are a seasoned and experienced professional, you're going to find this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for A flat sounds to be very beneficial. But before we dig in, I want to, as I always do at the beginning of every Jazz Piano Skills podcast episode, I want to welcome first-time listeners. And if you are indeed new to Jazz Piano Skills, if you're new to the Jazz Piano Skills podcast, I want to welcome you and I want to invite you to become a Jazz Piano Skills member. There are various membership plans to choose from, so check out jazzpianoskills.com to learn more about all of the perks of each membership plan. Now, there are educational weekly podcasts to enjoy, sequential jazz piano curriculum, which is loaded with comprehensive courses. There's an online weekly master classes, online interactive fake book, the private Jazz Piano Skills community that you can enjoy every day, which hosts a variety of engaging forums. And of course, there's unlimited and private personal and professional educational support to take advantage of as well. All of these perks are waiting for you, wanting to help you discover, learn, and play jazz piano. So take a moment, visit jazzpianoskills.com, and of course, become a member. Once you get there, if you have any questions whatsoever about any of the educational perks or the various membership plans, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Let me know. I'm always happy to spend some time with you, answer any questions that you may have, and help you in any way that I can. Okay, so let's get to the question of the week. Now, this week's question comes from Bill Brazovich. Bill, I hope I'm not butchering your name. If I am, please forgive me. But Bill lives in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And first things first, Bill. Bro, how do you handle the cold? I mean, really, come on, man. Man, when it gets down to 40 here in Dallas or even colder, I think to myself, man, I did not move far enough south. And when I'm done teaching here at the Dallas School of Music, I tell you, I am moving to some tropical paradise somewhere, some tropical climate where it never falls below 70. I have a brother-in-law who was in the Air Force and stationed in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And I went to visit my sister and her family over Christmas and this was years ago. And when my visit was over, and upon my departure, I informed them that I love you all very much, but I will never, ever, ever be back. So please do not take that personally. Bill, I'm not sure how you do it, man, but the upside, I guess, is that you spend a lot of time in the house during the winter, which means a lot of piano practicing. So there is an upside for sure. Okay, on to Bill's question. The question is this. I am spending quite a bit of time trying to learn my 4-note block chords and their inversions. Some of the shapes fall naturally under my hands, while others feel very uncomfortable. Some of the chords and inversions I have no problem remembering, but others always give me difficulty. In what ways do you suggest I work on these shapes so that I become comfortable with easily grabbing any chord in any order? Thanks for your help. Fantastic question, Bill. And know this. It's 100% normal. What you're experiencing, I can tell you, is 100% normal. I have taught for over 30 years, and I can tell you that everyone, and I mean everyone, experiences this same struggle. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is to be able to play your chords, what I call grouped by family. In other words, your C chords all grouped together. Your C major, C dominant, C minor, C half diminished, and C diminished, right? So the way I teach it, root position, C major, C dominant, C minor, C half diminished, C diminished. And then move on. Go to the key, the F family. So you get F major, F dominant, F minor, F half diminished, and F diminished, right? And so on. I would encourage you to move that, go in circle of fifths order, right? Counterclockwise, C to F to B flat to E flat, and so on. Now, be able to play these shapes and sounds in both hands in root position, and then once comfortable with root position, begin playing the chord families in first inversion, second inversion, and third inversion. So now the same exercise, the C family in first inversion, C major, C dominant, C minor, C half diminished, and C diminished, right? Then you would move that to second inversion, C major, C dominant, C minor, C half diminished, C diminished, and so on, okay? Now, that's a start, and that's a very good start. But what will happen, I guarantee it, what will happen is you will become very comfortable with the pattern of playing root, third, 5, and 7 for your major, then root, third, 5, 7, flat 7 for dominant, root, flat, third, 5, flat 7 for minor, root, flat, third, flat, fifth, flat 7 for half diminished, and then of course root, flat, third, flat, fifth, double flat 7, or or A for C diminished, right? So you kind of get used to that pattern. It's a comfy pattern. You lower the 7th, dominant, lower the 3rd, minor, lower the 5th, half diminished, lower the 7th again, diminished, right? So you'll get comfortable with that pattern from going from one chord to the next quicker than you do with actually being able to grab the chords on command, right? So to counter this, I practiced when I was going through this very same struggle that you're mentioning. When I practiced my chords, I did so using various patterns, right? So for example, I started practicing chords by quality. So I'd start with C major and maybe move in half steps: D flat major, D major, E flat major, E major. And I would play through all 12, right? Then I would do the same thing. I'd put my chords in first inversion: C major, D flat major, D major, E flat major. Then I would play them in second inversion: C major, D flat major, D major, and so on, right? And I would do that for dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished. I would then also practice my chords sorted by key. So in other words, the 7 chords that belong to the key of C. So I'd play C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G dominant, A minor, B half diminished, and then I would end with C major again. And of course, I would put those in inversions as well. So I'd play C major, first inversion, D minor, first inversion, E minor, first inversion, F major, G dominant, A minor, all in first inversion, B half diminished, and then C major. And of course, I would go into second inversion and third inversion. Okay, so now I've done my chords by family. I've done my chords by type or quality. I've done my chords by key. And then, of course, I would practice my chords by progression, like 2, 5, 1, using my inversions. So D minor to G dominant to C major. I'd go to the key of F. G minor, C dominant, F major. Key of B flat. C minor, F dominant, B flat major. And of course, I would play those starting my minor chord in different inversions, which would then change the inversion. I'd play my dominant and my major, right? Needless to say, all of these various ways to practice the chords help me begin seeing them from a different perspective other than just seeing them C major to C dominant to C minor, half diminished and diminished, okay? Now, what I also used to do is I used to use like the whole tone pattern, so which would create 2 exercises. So I would play a whole tone exercise, which would go C major to D major to E major to F sharp major or G flat major, A flat major, B flat major to C major. So I'm moving all my chords in using whole steps, right? And of course, then I'd start on D flat major and move in whole steps. D flat major, E flat major, F major, G major, A major, B major, right? So that's another way. I used to use minor third configurations. So I would do C major, E flat major, G flat major, A major, and then back to C. And this would create 3 different exercises. So I would then go D flat major, move in minor thirds, right? E major, G major, B flat major. And of course, I would do those exercises using different inversions as well. And then of course, I would do the good old-fashioned circle of fifths, where I would start with C major, go to F major, B flat major, E flat major, A flat major, D flat major, and I'd go around the entire circle of fifths using root position. Then I would change it to first inversion. So I'd go C major first inversion, F major first inversion, B flat major first inversion, E flat major first inversion, and so on. Wow, right? A lot of different ways to look at the same data, right? So I think the biggest challenge for students is the reason they have difficulty with the chords and inversions and these shapes is because they're always looking at them from the same perspective. So hopefully some of these exercises and ideas will shuffle the deck for you and force you to start looking at the data from a variety of perspectives. And in doing so, preventing you from just simply learning a chord construction formula, right? So these various patterns will also help you digest these shapes and sounds in a way that you can indeed get your hands on any chord coming from any chord with ease. In other words, you do not have to play C major in order to get to C dominant and so on. So that's a lot of information very quickly, and I hope this helps, Bill. But as always, if further clarification is needed, by all means, give me a shout. Happy to spend some time with you and, again, help you in any way that I can. Okay, so let's talk about today's lesson here quickly. Fingerings, right? Poor fingerings, without question, as I've mentioned before, based on decades of teaching experience, is the number one reason people have difficulty playing the piano. Quite simply, it is a lack of finger mobility, right? A type of hand paralysis, if you will, that makes it difficult for students to generate melodic lines, right? To improvise, right? Scale and arpeggio practice is, of course, a great way to begin developing hand mobility. However, scale and arpeggio practice that just simply goes straight up and straight down doesn't get the job done, because melodies do not simply move ascending and descending in a straight line. Right? They don't. So therefore it's important to begin practicing melodic patterns like the ones that we have been exploring since the start of the year. Melodic patterns that challenge us to begin shifting our hands across the keys, right? This intentional shifting begins to simulate a musical reality that pianists must deal with, right? We must address this reality. And this musical reality, the need to always have fingers available, allowing us to move in either direction, up or down, right, must be practiced in such a way that it develops proper musical instincts and muscle memory. Musical instincts and muscle memory that allows us to properly articulate melodies so that they sound idiomatic to jazz. Now, this is precisely why the melodic patterns that we are exploring today, that we have been exploring throughout the year, focus on intentionally creating hand shifts within a melodic line. Even if it is possible to play a melodic line with no hand shift at all, we insert one. Now, the objective is to begin establishing and developing hand-finger mobility. In fact, some of the fingerings I have notated in the lead sheet include multiple hand shifts within one measure, within one melodic idea. So, throughout this year, we are devoting our effort to exploring all 5 primary sounds of music for all 12 notes using arpeggio and scale developmental improvisational exercises that will force us to deal with fingerings in order to develop hand mobility. We are also utilizing the same approach, as I mentioned earlier, to explore the altered sounds of music, right? On the dominant sound, the flat 9, sharp 11, flat 5, sharp 5, flat 13. Each month, we focus on one of the 12 notes. 1 week of the month will be devoted to the primary sounds. 1 week of the month will be devoted to the altered sounds. We then, of course, followed up, as we have been doing, with a bebop tune to help us apply our new fingerings and articulation to a musical setting. So the educational agenda for today is as follows. Number 1, we begin our jazz improvisation exercises for A-flat sounds, the primary A-flat sounds. Number 2, we will play essential arpeggio patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play from the root to the 13th of the sound using a root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th entry. Number 3, we will play essential scale patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play from the root to the 13th of the sound, again using a root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th entry. Number 4, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises today using the major sound, the major sharp 11 sound, right, the Lydian mode. And number 5, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises using our traditional swing groove of 1-10. Now, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills member, I want you to take a few minutes right now, hit the pause button. I want you to download and print your podcast packets, the illustrations, the lead sheets, and the play-alongs. Your membership grants you access. Your trio membership grants you access to all educational podcast packets for every weekly podcast episode. And as I mentioned, every week you should use these podcast packets. You should have them in your hands and following along when listening to this episode. And of course, you should have them sitting on your piano when practicing as well. Now, if you are listening to this podcast on any of the popular podcast directories, and there are countless number of them, Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, the list goes on, then be sure to go directly to jazzpianoskillspodcast.com. That's jazzpianoskillspodcast.com to access and download your podcast packets. And you'll find the active download links in the show notes. One final, but one very important message. If you think that the jazz improvisation exercises for the primary A-flat sounds and the various skills that we are about to discover, learn, and play today are over your head, then I would say to you, please, no worries. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. No worries. All right? Every new skill is technically over our heads when first introduced. But you know what? This is how we get better, right? We place ourselves, like I like to say, we place ourselves smack dab in the middle of conversations where we don't belong, right? We're thinking, wow, I'm hearing things that I've never heard before. I have no idea what they are talking about. But this is how we are forced to grow intellectually. I say it all the time. All musical growth begins upstairs, mentally, conceptually, before it can come out downstairs physically in your hands. So simply just sit back and listen to this podcast lesson now to discover and learn. The play, no worries. It will come in time. I guarantee it. Okay, now that you have your lead sheets, your podcast packets in your hands, I want to point out a few things. You will see that lead sheets 1 through 5 deal with arpeggio motion. Lead sheets 6 through 10 address scale movement. You will also notice that the jazz improvisation exercises are the same for all 5 primary sounds, for major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished. The exercises, of course, are modified to reflect the proper sound. Now, you'll also notice my suggested fingerings are included for every note of every exercise, for every sound. Of course, you can modify the fingerings, but just be careful. Remember, we have to have hand shifts, movement. So if you're adjusting fingerings to remove the hand shift, you're working against the process, right? Also, remember that the fingerings allow you to play, proper fingerings allow you to play with proper jazz articulation. So you may be inclined to change fingerings because you think it feels more comfy or easier, at least initially. However, your easier may actually end up in the long run making it harder for you to play with proper jazz articulation. So just be careful, right? I'm just throwing it out as a little caution to the wind, if you will. Just be careful before making fingering adjustments. Okay, let's dig in. So grab lead sheet number 1, skill 1. Okay, A flat major. Again, I mentioned this earlier. I am using A flat major Lydian mode, which means there's a sharp 11 sound. Right? So the D flat is D natural in this scale. Okay, so now the arpeggios, all the arpeggios and scales will be built and structured around this sound. So if you look at letter A, the very first exercise, the very first pattern, lead sheet 1, skill 1, you'll see these are just simple, straight arpeggio motion from the root to the 7th, then from the 3rd to the 9th, 5th to the 11th, and the 7th to the 13th. You'll also notice there is a hand shift in every one of these 4-note arpeggios. So this is what I mentioned earlier. Do not change your fingerings to remove the hand shift thinking that, wait, it's a 4-note arpeggio. Why do I need to shift my hand? Those are there intentionally, right? So the very first pattern, the A flat major arpeggio starting on the root, starting with the 2nd finger, then 1, 2, 4. 3rd to the 9th, 1, 3, 1, 3. Right? And so on. So there's always going to be a shift. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's listen to the letter A. 4-note arpeggios from the root, from the 3rd, from the 5th, and the 7th, moving through the entire sound from the root all the way to the 13th. Okay? I'm going to start off. I'm going to play about 4 measures of A flat major at the beginning to settle into the tempo. Then you'll hear me play each arpeggio 4 times before moving on to the next arpeggio. I'm going to focus on my fingerings and playing with a nice, relaxed jazz articulation and feel as I shift and move my hand through each one of these arpeggios. So here we go. Let's bring the ensemble in and let's check it out. Right? Just nice and simple. I've mentioned this before as well. Letter A of all of these exercises, letter A on all of these lead sheets, your most important exercise. I know B is important, C, D, and E. Yes, they're great. But letter A, if you had to practice one, practice letter A. Okay, ascending arpeggio motion from the root, from the third, from the fifth, from the seventh, exploring the entire sound. Okay, let's take a look at letter B. Very similar, right? Our arpeggio gets stretched a little bit because we add a little contour to the arpeggio. So instead of a straight arpeggio, we get this now. Again, we're going to launch from the root, from the third, from the fifth, and from the seventh, going all the way to the 13th. So each of these arpeggios now have a little more contour to them, but they also, each arpeggio still includes a hand shift. Okay, so let's bring the ensemble in. I'm going to utilize the exact same approach, right? Same format. I'm going to play A flat major up front for about 4 measures, then each arpeggio 4 times before moving on to the next arpeggio. I want to play with a nice, relaxed jazz articulation, jazz feel, and include a hand shift in each one of these motifs. Okay? So here we go. Let's check it out. So now let's take a look at letter C. Even though letter A is the most important, right? Letter C I think is my my favorite. And the reason being is because we break some rules here, right? Some traditional rules that have been around for a long time. Number one is we are starting our motif, our A flat major motif, with our thumb on A flat. Anyone with any classical background, classical training, has probably been taught never begin a scale or arpeggio that begins with a black note with your thumb, right? Not the case, not always the case. And so letter C intentionally starts our motif with the thumb, and then we have to shift our entire hand to play this idea. So we're going 1-4, 1-5, 3-1. And again, we're going to then start on the third and do the same type of motion, the same type of hand shifting. All right, and then on the fifth, the hand is shifting across those notes, right? You can literally feel it when you play these exercises. The movement of the hand. So letter C is fabulous. Get comfortable with placing the thumb up on the black note on A flat and then again on E flat. Believe me, it may feel odd at first, but it will start to become comfortable, I promise. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter C. to letter D and eighth note triplets, right? Now the challenge here, right? Of course, we have the hand shifts, but the challenge here is the stabilization of your wrist, right? You do not want to be moving your wrist like you're opening a jar, right? So if you can imagine placing your hand on top of a jar and moving your wrist to open that jar, your wrist should not be moving like that when playing these triplets, right? So the motif sounds like this. So how do we prevent our hand from opening the jar? We prevent our hands from opening the jar by shifting our hand. So you're going to have to let go of notes and shift the hand in order to play the motif, right? We get into trouble when we try to hang on to a note, moving to the next note, and so then the wrist rotates in order to compensate for that. So let go of the notes, play the triplets, but do not open the jar, okay? Do not open the jar. So pay attention to the hand shifts, keep that wrist stabilized, and let's see what this sounds like when played properly. So here comes the ensemble. Let's check it out. Playing eighth note triplets challenging? Wow. Well, join the club, right? They are for everyone. So play at slower tempos. I'm playing everything again at 110 today, but that's just for the sake of time. I would encourage you to play these exercises at much slower tempos, right? 60, 70, 80, nice and relaxed, and paying attention to the shifting of the hand and the stabilization of that wrist, right? Okay, so now, letter E, the last arpeggio exercise for today. Our motif now extends the entire past measure 1 into measure 2. So the idea, the motif is longer, right? But again, several hand shifts to deal with. We're moving from the root entry, third entry, fifth entry, seventh entry. So we cover the entire sound. But we have straight eighth note motion again, right? So we get, wow. So the hand again, like I mentioned with the eighth note triplets, the hand has to be shifting, not the wrist rotating, okay? Same idea off the third, same idea off the fifth, same idea off the seventh. All right, let's bring the ensemble in and let's listen to our last arpeggio exercise for today, letter E. Here we go. we're on to lead sheet 6, skill 6. Now we shift our attention from arpeggio motion to scale motion. So if you take a look at letter A on skill 6 or lead sheet 6, we have straight ascending scale motion from the root, from the third, from the fifth, and from the seventh. Again, the scale motion has hand shifts incorporated into the fingerings. And again, we're exploring the entire major sound from the root to the 13th. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out straight scale movement from the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh. Here we go. Just as I mentioned with letter A of the arpeggio exercises, I'm going to say the exact same thing about letter A of the scale exercises. If you're going to pick one out of the 5 exercises to focus on, letter A of your arpeggios, letter A of your scales. Straight ascending arpeggio motion, ascending, straight ascending scale motion, right? If you get those down, those exercises down, those motifs down, I should say, in each one of those exercises from the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh, you'll be doing yourself a great favor. All right, so now let's take a look at letter B. Again, scale motion now, it's like basically scale motion again, but a little more contour to the line, right? Not just straight ascending motion. So we get something like this. Nice idea. We're going to do the same thing again off the third. So the hand has to shift. Again, stabilize that wrist and shift the hand across the keys. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's listen to letter B. Scale movement from the root, third, fifth, and seventh. Here we go. that if we dealt with eighth note triplets with arpeggios, we're going to have to deal with eighth note triplets with our scales. And sure enough, letter C, we do exactly that. Our motif is again getting longer. Each motif gets a little longer. Now we stretch into measure 2. But we're using the same format, right, all the way through. Whether it's arpeggios or whether it's scales, we're exploring everything from various entry points within the sound, from the root, from the 3rd, 5th, and the 7th. Again, with these triplets, you have to let go of the notes and you have to shift the hand. Do not hang on to the notes. If you do, your wrist will rotate and will make it much more difficult to execute the motif, the line. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out these scale motion using eighth note triplets, launching from the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. Here we go. So we're on the letter D, and again, if you just eyeball it, you can see that these motifs, these lines get longer, and as the lines get longer, it incorporates more shifting, more hand shifting, right? But at least we're back to straight eighth note, a straight eighth note pattern, right? It's a nice idea, nice line. So pay attention to the fingerings, pay attention to the wrist, let go of the notes, and play with a nice jazz articulation and jazz feel, nice and relaxed. From the root, from the 3rd, from the 5th, from the 7th. Great ear training too, by the way, right? Hearing sounds from the root to the 7th, from the 3rd to the 9th, from the 5th to the 11th, from the 7th to the 13th. Wow. Such a great way to practice scales, such a great way to practice arpeggios, such a great way to incorporate the ears into the practicing, right? To activate the ears. Wow. Okay, let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter D. to our final line for today, exercise for today, letter E, scale motion. Again, our motif now is getting even longer into measure 2. But again, right, straight eighth note feel. So we get something that sounds like this now. So you get this nice ascending motion, but there's some contour to the line, which is going to require some multiple hand shifting. All right, but again, same format, root, third, fifth, seventh entry. I mentioned it earlier. I want to mention again because it's so important. Slow tempos. I'm playing 110. You do not need to play 110. Slow it down and focus on the hand movement. Focus on the fingerings, the shifting, right? Articulation. There's so much to focus on. So many different aspects going on here at one time, right? So keep your tempos nice and comfortable. So, okay, let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out letter E. Here we go. Well, as always, we have unpacked an enormous amount of information in one very, very short, very fast hour. Now, I modeled everything today using the major sound, right? All improvisation exercises today, I used the major sound. Be sure to practice these exercises for the dominant, the minor, and half diminished and diminished sounds as well, right? They're all laid out for you in your lead sheets, right? Your podcast packets has the fingerings included for every exercise, for every sound. Now remember, you can indeed make some modifications to the fingerings to best suit your hand, but just be sure that whatever fingerings you choose allow you to play the exercises with an authentic jazz articulation, and be sure that you're not eliminating hand shifts, all right? Do not eliminate the hand shifts. And also be sure that you practice these exercises from the various entry points, from the root, from the third, from the fifth, and from the seventh. You have a ton to tackle this week, right? As always, a ton to tackle. So use your practice time wisely. And next week we jump into jazz improvisation exercises for the A-flat altered sounds, dominant altered sounds, okay? Make sure you use those podcast packets, those lead sheets, the illustrations. Check out the illustrations. Very helpful, right? To help you with the paper practice, sorting out the information and the data conceptually before you get to the keys and try to apply it physically. So spend some time with the illustrations and also the play-along files that are available for you to use as well. Most importantly, be patient, all right? Developing mature professional jazz piano skills takes time. So begin structuring your improvisation development, begin structuring your practicing after the playing demonstrations that I modeled for you today in this podcast episode. And I guarantee it that you will begin to see, you will begin to feel, and hear your musical progress. Well, I hope you have found this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for the A-flat primary sounds to be insightful and, of course, to be very beneficial. Don't forget, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills Ensemble member, I will see you online Thursday evening at the Jazz Piano Skills Masterclass, 8 p.m. Central Time, to discuss this podcast episode, exploring the improvisation exercises for A-flat primary sounds in greater detail, and of course, to answer any questions that you may have about the study of jazz in general. You can always reach me by phone if you have any questions, 972-380-8050. My office extension is 211. If you're more comfortable using email, my email address is drlawrence@jazzpianoskills.com. That's drlawrence@jazzpianoskills.com. Or you can use the nifty little SpeakPipe widget that is nestled on every web page found within the Jazz Piano Skills website. Well, there is my cue. That's it for now. And until next week, enjoy the jazz improvisation exercises for the A-flat sounds, the primary sounds. And most of all, have fun as you discover, learn, and play jazz piano.